Hopefully everybody's having a great week this week. My name is Allison Trumbull, and I am an account executive here at Automation Alley. Thank you for tuning into our Tech Takeover series this morning. We're very excited to have everybody tuning into the live stream. We've seen a lot of change and uncertainty these last few weeks, and we are so happy to be able to provide content that will help individuals and companies return to work successfully or start and continue their digital transformation. A little bit about Automation Alley, if you're not familiar, we are the World Economic Forum's Advanced Manufacturing Hub, or AmHub, for North America and Michigan's Industry 4.0 Knowledge Center. Our mission is to educate our members on the rapid technological change taking place within the industry, focus on digital transformation, branding, and telling your Industry 4.0 story. We do this by hosting a series of information-packed events throughout the year, both in person and, as you can see, digitally. For example, we host these Industry 4.0 focus sessions every Wednesday, either in person or via live stream. We have our Integrate conference coming up in November that, as of now, will be at TCF Center in Detroit and in person. At this conference, we will also be hosting a series of roundtable discussions in partnership with the World Economic Forum. So these discussions help us to define Michigan's Industry 4.0 strategy and help us to prioritize technologies and topics to focus on throughout the rest of the year. If you have any questions regarding any of the events coming up or would like more information, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. We also have a bunch of information on our website, automationalley.com, as well. In the meantime, we do have a newer series called The New Normal. It takes place every Thursday morning at 9 a.m., where we interview individuals on different strategies when embracing what this new normal looks like. So be sure to tune in next week to learn about embracing augmented reality for safe and efficient restart. This morning, we are joined by Shepherd Advisors and a special guest, Josh Bischoff from Gyra Metal Products, who will be hosting a panel to talk about utilizing scenario planning. So Shepherd Advisors focus on helping companies pivot in today's challenging and changing market shifts. Today, their topic will be centered on how to specifically improve decision-making over the next 6 to 12 months, despite ongoing COVID-related market uncertainties. They have created a tool specifically for this using a scenario-based approach that can help companies to make sense of what the current state is that we're in and prepare for the unknown future that's coming. So with that, I want to thank everybody from Shepherd Advisors and Josh as well for taking the time to educate us this morning. And with that, I will turn it over to Locke McCabe for the panel. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Allison. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Automation Alley for providing this opportunity to really share with your members this powerful tool that companies can use right now to begin planning for the future that's coming, even though we're not entirely sure what that future is going to bring. Our presentation today focuses on using this tool of scenario planning to enable you all to better navigate and pivot amidst the COVID-19 market uncertainties that most of us are being challenged with right now. And as Allison, as you said, we have a toolkit that we are offering, at no charge, called Pivot 2020. And in this case, we're using Pivot as an acronym for planning in volatile and opportunistic times. It's a powerful toolkit. We'll be walking through its different parts this morning. And, we hope you all enjoy this next hour and a half and walk away with a real sense that the future's coming and we can get ready for it. All right, just another minute or two about Shepherd Advisors. Shepherd Advisors, we're a market and strategy firm, and what we do is we help clients build resilience and sustain their growth. And we do that primarily through a combination of strategy, of helping them focus on what is most important going forward and how to position themselves to meet their goals, regardless of what the market's going to be bringing their way. Culture, building more cultural resilience, and aligning that culture with strategy, and then also best practices in execution. And we're joined here by just an awesome team here at Shepherd Advisors. Just introduce myself for a moment, and then just really want to introduce the rest of the team. Myself, I started Shepherd Advisors about 20 years ago. Focused initially in the clean technology space, working primarily with startups, and then over the last 10 years in particular, have really honed in working with manufacturers, advanced technology, and business service companies, more in the second stage area, and working on the strategic questions of how do we double, triple the size of our business within the next 3 to 5 years. And over the last year and a half, just have been blessed to work with just a terrific group of gentlemen here. Mike, would love to introduce you next. We started working together just over a year ago, and you bring to this process just an amazing background. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Mike Holsworth. So I spent over 25 years involved in food manufacturing, both large companies and small. Locke and I and the team at Shepherd joined up here a little over a year ago, and my focus with Shepherd is primarily on execution, both sales and marketing as well as operations.
Yeah. And Ed, please introduce yourself.
Good morning. My name's Ed Holinsky. Thanks very much, Locke. I've spent over the last 20 years in learning and organizational development, helping initially large organizations to pivot through challenging times. I worked in leadership role with Marsh McLennan during 9/11 and on the 08-09 crisis, worked with Mercer, leading their learning and organizational development function through a major transformation. And subsequent to that, I've worked with a number of mid-market companies that have been going through similar transitions and transformations. So my focus and the common theme through those roles really has been to help organizations and leaders get better through times of transition and transformation, with a particular focus on culture enhancement. Thanks, Locke.
Well, thank you, Ed. And Merv, please introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. Merv Kars. I'm a mechanical engineer by education. Worked in the automotive business in the OEM side at Ford for 14 years in various levels of management, in research, product planning, manufacturing, and also new market programs. Left that to set up a US division for a European group, around that for 12 years, and then got involved with the more exciting part of life, which is doing startups. And I was involved with managing 4 high-tech startups, 2 in the heavy-duty trucking industry, 1 in the materials side, and 1 in the manufacturing processing side. I've always loved innovation. I've always loved bringing new technology to market. And I've been blessed in all my career with working with some very talented and pleasant people to be around. And that's no exception today with the team we have here at Shepherd Advisors. Locke?
Yeah, well, thank you, Merv. Yeah, it is a pleasure working with you all. And one of the things that you all brought to this process is, really decades of experience of working with companies, large companies, small companies, tech companies, manufacturing companies that are working through the economic ups and downs. And you've done a really just great job in bringing your complementary and respective experiences and skill sets into this Pivot 2020 tool that we're going to be diving into here more in just a few minutes. And also want to just welcome to our panel this morning, Josh Bischoff, who's the Director of Operations and Strategy at Jira Metal. Josh, please introduce yourself to the audience here.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Josh Bischoff. I've been with Jira for about 16 years in various roles, starting in production and focused on tool and die engineering, and then operations management for the last 10 years. So, we're a progressive metal stamper and really trying to push what metal stamping can be as far as innovation in our space with our customer groups. So it was intriguing to me to join the Shepherd group here with the Pivot 2020 and just see where we could take the business through this trying time.
Yeah, and you'll have a chance later in the webinar to share your experiences. At the end of the day, we can talk about a tool, but it only matters as to the degree that it's actually usable and makes a difference. So you're going to have a chance to share with the audience, what your experience has been. And I'm waiting for it because I know part of the story, but I'm sure there's parts of the story we haven't heard yet. So
Always know.
so with that, let's just get into the meat of the presentation. And first of all, we're just going to do a little bit of setup to make sure that that you all know where we're coming from, and hopefully this aligns pretty much with where you guys are coming from as well. There's a group out of Ohio State called the National Center for the Middle Market, and they focus on the middle market space and did a survey towards the end of March, talking to CEOs of middle market companies and basically asking, what's going on, what's happening given the coronavirus impacts on the economy, on their business, et cetera. And needless to say, the vast majority of those CEOs were in shock. Almost 80% of them said that they expected their revenues to take a significant hit. 25% of them said they may not be in business, that the impacts here may be catastrophic for them. And just over half of the CEOs said that the ongoing uncertainty of this situation is really the most difficult aspect of managing the current environment. And we get it. COVID-19 and its impacts are extremely disruptive, not only to the demand side, but the supply side and all the connector points in between. And while we're getting more certainty in some areas, just broadly speaking, this uncertainty, we should expect it to last a while. Things are going to move up, move down, move sideways, move ways that are predictable, ways that are not predictable. This is going to be challenging. And given that space, it's really hard to determine what the right strategy is to go forward. But fortunately, with scenario planning, I think you'll find a tool that enables you to not only sort of navigate what's going on more effectively and proficiently, but also then really position you to be in the right place for the new normal as it comes, and really be positioned to not only rebound but improve your market standing, in the recovery to come, whenever exactly that is going to be. And so our objectives today are really to help you all, navigate navigate the future, which for some of you, for many of us, looks a little scrambled at the moment. Specifically, what we want to be doing is sharing with you our insights about scenario planning, and give you some specific methods and this toolkit that you can use to implement scenario planning in your processes if you choose to go that route. We'll be sharing about implementation of the tools. And, fundamentally, we want to determine whether this is of value for you. And if it is, support you in outlining the next steps. And one way or another, we hope you're going to walk away from this webinar with a sense of what is a pathway, and a good pathway, a proven pathway for you to have greater clarity and confidence going into the future, whatever exactly that future is going to be. And with that, I want to just dive a little bit more into scenario planning. That's a tool. That's a term that I'm sure most of you have heard of. It's a tool that's usually used for large companies, or rather, large companies usually use this, and they use scenario planning to look out over the next 10, 20, 30, even 50 years. One of the things we're doing at Shepherd, as I mentioned earlier, we focus on strategy. Usually the strategy work we do has an orientation of what's the pathway to double or triple the size of the business over the next 3 to 5 years. Well, we have calibrated scenario planning and moved it to a place where it can help you figure out where you want to go over the next 6, 12, even 24 months. So what we have done is recalibrate the scenario planning method that is usually used to look way over the horizon and bring it so that you can start using it now to figure out more clearly where you want to be going and how you want to be positioning yourself right now. And the reason why this works is fundamentally what scenario planning does is it looks at the mega drivers of the future and plays them out. We don't know what's going to happen on the economic side, on the pandemic side, the technical, the political. We don't know how this is all going to unfold. but we can begin to get a sense of how they might unfold. We can call them uncertainties, and we can begin to take the uncertainties that are going to have the most impact on your business and begin to combine these uncertainties in different ways so that you can begin to get a sense of, well, we don't know what the future is going to be, but we can begin to envision what the future could be. What are different plausible futures? And as we take these uncertainties and build scenarios, well, then your team can put together the strategies that you'd want to have in place in order for your firm to not only survive, but thrive in these different futures. And then as you have clarity about what the uncertainties are, what the scenarios therefore ought to be, the strategies to respond to the scenarios, well, then we can start monitoring leading indicators and data sources that begin helping us know what future is actually coming our way. And as we know which future is actually coming our way, well, then we're going to be able to make better planning decisions today. And so, while we can't predict the future, we can envision what the futures could be, develop strategies to be pre-positioned to be successful in those different futures. And then when we understand more about what the future actually is going to be, act accordingly. This has a number of benefits for companies that go through this. And Ed, I want to turn to you, please, to share just some of these benefits with our audience.
Yes, thanks, Locke. There are several direct and indirect benefits that result from doing effective scenario planning. First and foremost, it prepares your organization to move faster than your competition by having done the heavy lifting up front, anticipating how things might unfold and having different strategies to approach different situations. Secondly, it creates a discipline that will serve the organization well through this time of crisis and recovery. But more importantly, it'll build a competency that will endure beyond that, so that there's a new discipline about looking at the future and planning for that in a constructive way. Third, it'll help to surface meaningful team conversations, which I think Josh will talk in more depth about. It generates discussions that you might not otherwise have as a leadership team regarding the state of the business, what the future may look like, and considerations that you should go through as a team. And out of that helps you to surface options, start to think constructively about things, the way that things may unfold, how to best leverage what you have to take advantage of that and not be left standing still and just subject to the changes of the marketplace. And that in turn will help you strategically determine how to best deploy limited resources and cash flow, which is paramount today, given the crunch that many businesses are going through. And then finally, and this has a profound impact on organizations. So really would like to call this out as being maybe in some ways one of the most important, in that it helps the team psychologically to do meaningful work that's going to have a payoff for the organization. Many times employees will look to leaders and say, so what are we going to do? And you may or may not have an answer, but you can say, we're starting to plan for different contingencies. We as a team are looking at what might unfold and how to best address that, and we're welcoming the input of the organization. That has not just a calming effect on the leadership team to be spending their time in a worthwhile way, but it's contagious. That'll start to calm the larger organization just because they'll know that some things are underway to plan for this new future. Thank you, Locke.
Well, and thank you, Ed. And I want to just build off of that because our focus on this didn't come from nowhere. The particular genesis of focusing on scenario planning and building the Pivot 2020 toolkit really came from Mike. And Mike, you when this was all unfolding in mid-March, you shared that this experience reminded you of an earlier time. And would you please talk about sort of your experience?
Yeah, thanks, Locke.
Yeah,
there really are. We found there are different phases business goes through in a crisis. I'd like to walk you through those through the lens that we had with a different crisis, 9/11. The first phase is really about the immediate issues, and these are primarily key business needs and people. That certainly was our case. Right after the attack, we had people traveling throughout the country. We had to keep them safe, get them home. And the attack also coincided when our cash needs in the business were right at their apex. So we had real liquidity issues we were going to have to contend with. And this is not uncommon. This is what happens to businesses immediately after a crisis. And really, there isn't enough oxygen in the room to get up, take a breath, and try and consider anything else, nor should there be. This is what businesses have to contend with in the early stages of a crisis. However, there will be a time when these will subside and you will move on to the next phase. Flip the slide. And here teams are beginning to consider, well, now what? I mean, there was no history to guide us here. And I had a team with divergent opinions on how good or how bad it was going to be. So we really came to the conclusion, we don't know what the future holds. But while we can't predict the future, we can at least plan for different potential outcomes. And so that's exactly what we did. The first thing we had to do was to assess the business. Our environment post 9/11 was very different than it was before. And from that, we could then say, based on what we're saying, if these things break, that's probably the best we can hope for. But if those things happen, that's probably the worst we're going to encounter. And here's more likely what's going to be facing us. And then we could go ahead and have an action plan for each one of those scenarios. And then finally, we had to develop, well, what's going to tell us which future is going to emerge? And so we had to have alignment around a set of key indicators that were going to give us the most forward-looking vision we could have in terms of exactly what was going to come at us. And at this point, I don't want to say that the anxiety left the team. The anxiety can't leave with this much uncertainty, but we did have a renewed confidence that we were at least back in control of it. And from there, it just became a very rigorous discipline on not just staying with the indicators and what are they telling us, but what are the decisions we have to make and when. I mean, all business at times is about making decisions with less than perfect information. In a crisis, that goes on steroids. So it was really important to our team not just to know, hey, what decisions have to be made based on the future we're seeing emerging, but also when they had to be made. And by staying true to this, it helped us not just navigate the crisis, but come out that much stronger on the other side. So there really are 3 different phases. And when you're in phase 1, you don't have the time or the inclination to think about much else. But there is this transitionary phase, and that's what we're going to be talking to you about today, in which you're now trying to develop the plan to move forward. And some companies are very reactive here, and some companies are more proactive, get more control over this. And here's a tool, and today is a tool we want to talk to you about that can help you gain that control. And frankly, I would have loved to have had it, 20 years ago when we were going through it, because I think that teams that are more on top of and in control of the situation here will find themselves transitioning not just through the crisis better, but coming out that much stronger on the other side. Thanks, Locke.
Oh, thank you, Mike. It's a powerful story, and I'm excited that one of the ways that we were able to build on that story and then say, how do we get this word out to companies all over Michigan, so that as we're moving through this time, as companies, as communities, as a state, we come out relatively stronger. And so this Pivot 2020 Toolkit is, designed specifically to enable you to do exactly that for your company and within your community, to move through this process with more clarity and confidence, regardless of what the economy does. And, with that, I'd say the setup is largely done. We want to move more into the application of this process, and use the Pivot 2020 Toolkit as the vehicle of applying scenario planning. What this toolkit is, and I will get a copy of this to everyone that's participating in this webinar right afterwards, is it is a combination of 4 integrated tools that are designed specifically to ask critical questions, to evoke and get thinking around and planning for different futures, and then zero in on the indicators that are those that should be monitored going forward, so you have greater clarity about which future is actually coming our way. And we have a reference example that we're Advanced Tooling Inc. that we'll be referencing through the presentation. We also have it in a Pivot 2020 guidebook that we can send you all if you want the reference example. The design of this toolkit is to be self-implementable. You all hopefully will be able to get through this work in 1 to 2 business days, though most of the companies that take this on, they don't try and get it all done in 1 to 2 days. They spread it out over a couple of weeks, but it's designed to be largely self-implementable and be done sooner rather than later. And this is a fillable PDF that you can go back and update and really treat it as a living document and living planning tool going forward. And as you use this, both the scenario planning structure and the Pivot 2020 toolkit, we hope you're going to see immediate benefits from making better decisions. And just simply as news uncertainties come your way, you're going to be better placed mentally, organizationally, and strategically to navigate them. Let me just get more into detail in terms of the tools themselves. As Mike referenced in the second stage, there's a process of assessing, anticipating, analyzing, and then planning. And we have a tool that aligns with each of these different phases. So the first tool is really assessing the current state. And we'll go into a little bit of detail here. It's pretty robust, and it's designed to really help that you all become very clear about what your current reality is related to demand, supply, the business, and the future that you're seeing. Typically, this takes around 4 to, this could be 6 hours of team time to go through all of the components of the current state assessment. And this is the longest, this item will typically take the longest period of time. The scenario planning tool is the second tool and really comes out of the insights gained by doing the assessment. And with the scenario planning tool, you're really driving towards what is the best case, the worst case, and a likely case, framing those up both in terms of what the market conditions would be in a best case, worst case, likely case scenario, and then what you're going to do about it. What is your strategic response? And then just really importantly, while the scenario planning tool is pretty much qualitative, we want to also, and we're just going to really encourage you to supplement the qualitative scenarios with some quantitative financial analysis. In particular, looking out over the next 12 months at P&L and cash flow, you want to understand the financial implications and financial outcomes of the different scenarios and how they might play out. And then finally, then we're on to monitor and act. And that is a tool that is specifically designed to help management track leading indicators on a regular basis. We recommend monthly, so that you can begin to really see what is coming down the pike in terms of how the markets are shaping up, and then pivot your decisions accordingly, in response of not only to where things are now, but the way you see them coming down the line. And let me keep going. As you're going through this process, we recommend right at the get-go that you put together a pivot team. You can call it whatever you want, but basically what you want is a group of leaders in the business that are working on this together. In particular, you want someone there who is mindful and taking care of the strategy side, the biz dev side, procurement, supply chain side, financial strategy, CFO side, the people HR side, and then of course your customer relations, customer engagement side. Often you'll have one person play multiple roles, but if your team is big enough, you're going to have individuals playing each of these roles, and all of these folks are going to make key contributions to not only initial assessment, but the strategies that emerge from that, and the scenarios that emerge, the strategies that emerge, and then and then the indicators that matter going forward. Let me now dive more specifically into the first tool. And as I mentioned earlier, the first tool has a demand side, a supply side, a focus on your business, and the focus on the future. And the purpose here really is to develop a realistic view of what your current situation is, where you all are starting from. And from where you're starting, what are the potential futures that your team is beginning to see, beginning to envision. And in this process, you want to go through it rigorously. You want to debate. You want to have a dialogue where different perspectives are being brought to bear. You may even go outside of the team and get outside perspectives to better inform your team about not only where you are, but what might be coming. And we also recommend that you work together as a team to manage each of these sections. Often what companies will do is they'll take these different parts of the assessment and split them up amongst different folks. And this is important because there are a series of questions. There are, I believe, around 35 specific questions, and I'll just give you a flavor for it. For instance, in this first section on the demand side, there are market questions, customer questions, competition questions. So some of the market questions include, what are the permanent market changes that are happening right now that are going to be impacting your business right now and going forward? Which parts of your business are in the best position to weather the current storm? And which parts of the business are in the worst position or the least valuable, the pieces that probably are going to have to get thrown overboard, or at least you're going to want to think about it depending upon which scenario you're looking at. On the customer side, this is who's going to weather this crisis and who's likely to go out of business or really struggle, and what do we do about that, and what are the implications of that? And then on the competition side, it's the same question. Who is going to likely survive and come through this crisis stronger? Who is likely going to falter and potentially close? And with all of these sections, we ask the leading questions, and then we have a place where you can put in implications and actions. As you put together the responses to your questions, all right, what are the implications of these responses, and what are some of the actions that you could take going forward? On the supply chain, questions focus really on which parts of our supply chain are critical for us, which parts may disappear or be severely constrained. What are other alternative supply solutions we might need to look for? On the talent side, how do we keep our top talent? How do we get better talent? What do we do with our talent? Is our cost going to go up? Is it going to go down? Just how are we thinking about that? And then the third section here, focusing on the business, it really sort of gets at the guts of the business itself. And with this, I'd like to hand it over to Ed, because the guts of the business includes many things, including the culture and leadership of the business. And Ed, would you please share more about that?
Yes, thank you, Locke, for sure. So we initially start with what you want to stand for as a business, and that's an important starting point before you actually start shaping the contours of what it's going to look like financially. It gives you an opportunity to revisit your purpose. Is that still relevant today, and how important is that for the organization? Also gives you an opportunity to think about core values and which of those really have stood out through this crisis in a way where it's not just paying lip service to what you think you want to be as an organization. It really is about who you are at your core and how do you continue that on as an organization. As part of that, we also ask you to look at your leadership team to think about whether you have the right talents in the team. It's not a good time to be swapping people out, but you can think about whether they're positioned in the most appropriate way to help you drive your agenda forward. Are the people that are good relating to employees out front and talking with them on a regular basis? Are the people that are more strategic working with you more behind the scenes to do scenario planning and other things to help the organization? And out of that will come new opportunities. As you think about the new business that's going to emerge out of this, you'll think about the capabilities you have and how distinct those may be in the marketplace, how you might be able to better leverage those in the new marketplace, and then what you need to do organizationally to move that forward. And culture will be a key component of that, both in terms of leveraging it to use it as a foundation to get through this, and also to enhance it, to think about what you might need to behave just a little differently to survive in our new environment. Thanks, Lai.
Oh, thank you, Ed. It's a crucial part of the assessment, and it is a place where you're really looking internally to the business. Who are we? Who do we want to be? What is our fundamental set of assets, weaknesses, vulnerabilities, strengths, and how are we going to do this? And then section 4 really has much more of a future orientation, and it really is the transition from the assessment over to the scenario planning. There's a number of questions related to positioning, and it basically are questions related to if the market goes in a really negative direction, what could that look like, and what could the implications for us be? If the market ends up going in a real positive direction, well, what could that look like? What are the implications for that? And then what do we think is likely, given where we are right now, about where the market could be going, and the implications for that direction upon us? We're really focused with positioning and these positioning questions to get the team to think really negative, really positive, and then what is most likely going forward. And then as you have clarity about what the futures might look like, then dive into what are the indicators, the leading indicators that will help the team see more clearly what's coming down the way. And these leading indicators may be very, very specific sales and marketing leading indicators, but they also hopefully are going to be industry leading indicators, and even macro national level leading indicators, because we want to understand not only what's going to happen in the next month or two, but 6 months down the line, 9 months down the line, even a year down the line, because the more visibility we have in terms of the future that's actually coming, the better positioned we're going to be to, in fact, navigate the turbulence that we're going through right now and pivot appropriately. Let me just keep going here. And there we go. All right. Well, let's get into some more specifics about this process here. And what I want to do is really introduce introduce our sample company. Our sample company is Advanced Tubing Incorporated. It's a $25 million company that sells advanced tubing fabrication services to the automotive and to the oil and gas industry. It's got about 120 employees and 2 manufacturing operations and an R&D center. And it is a company that is looking into the future and saying, hey, you know what, we need to get our act together here. We don't know what the future is going to bring, but we want to get, position ourselves to do this right. We're going to go through the assessment, and in order to get through this, we're going to delegate our responses, because we've got multiple people that can respond to different parts of the assessment. We're going to focus on answering these questions, shortly, with bullet points, because it's really the quality of thought that matters. And then as we are getting more information, better information, we're going to update our thinking and insights along the way. And Merv, as you went through this process with Advanced Tubing Incorporated, you got a couple key things out of the assessment process, and I'd love for you to share what those some of those key things were.
Sure, thanks, Locke. The ATI story here that we're going to talk about through this presentation. ATI has been given some interesting situations that's going to have to resolve as we go through the various scenarios. As it went through the assessment process, it came up with basically 4 areas that are going to need management's concern. One was the supply chain issues. A big one is going to be key personnel retention. As Locke mentioned, it's got an oil and gas business, which is focused in one of their plants specifically, and that's going to need a lot of attention. And last but not least, as the scenarios unwrap, you'll see that ATI's future is very much dependent upon where the market goes. Now, from a supply standpoint, ATI uses tubing. It buys steel and aluminum tubing from the tube mills directly. And of course, the tube mills have been shut down too. So as they're coming online, ATI is concerned as a small company Are they going to be able to support the OEMs as they start to launch up and maintain their just-in-time supply? So they may actually have to go to the OEMs themselves and get their purchasing activities involved to try to encourage the tube mills to support the business. From a personnel standpoint, ATI's claim to fame is that they have this unique invented process, which the OEMs love because the new products made from this process are lighter, stronger, cheaper. And so the OEMs would like ATI's design team to be around for the future. So that was a concern for ATI. Mm-hmm. The oil and gas business, what can we say? Oil and gas globally is having a serious situation. So management at ATI is going to have to make some serious decisions with regard to that. And last but not least, as we create these scenarios for ATI, we're going to see as we go through the program that ATI's future is very much dependent upon where the business comes out of the other end. So with that in place and the assessment tools being done, now it's time for scenario planning. Locke?
Thank you, Merv. Yeah, so as the assessment, creates a lot of clarity about where we are and what some of the futures could begin to look like. Scenario planning really brings this into it brings your team into a process of not only talking about the future, but really developing specific stories about what the future could be and how we're going to respond to that. Scenario planning, the focus of it is really to confront uncertainty and confront it by envisioning, how different uncertainties could play out, creating distinctly different, plausible futures, and then challenging the team to say, okay, given these different futures, what are we going to do to position ourselves not only to survive, but to thrive in these new potential environments? And as you go through the scenario process, you're going to be building, some specific stories. And as part of the Pivot 2020 Toolkit, we have a number of sections that we encourage you to fill out for these scenarios. First of all, give the scenario a name, and then give a brief description in particular of what's going on the macro environment in the industry that is shaping this particular scenario. And then what are some of the key headlines that are getting management's attention and really being used to say, well, this is the future that's actually unfolding within this scenario. And then the key piece then is, given the headlines, what are the strategic moves that the business is going to take in order to position itself to survive and thrive in that particular scenario. And then as you become clear about the strategic moves that you'll be making, well, then the investments that you might be wanting to make in order to grow and improve competitive positioning are going to become clearer. And also the key decisions and actions that you're going to take to reduce cost, reduce risk, are also going to become clearer. And as you can imagine, this begins to pull together as a story that says, if this future comes our way, then this is our response. This is why we're going to be successful, and this is how we're going to do it. And it's just also really, really important to take that story then and run the numbers with it. So you're going to see there's an iteration between tool 2, which is developing the scenarios, and then tool 3, which is running through the financial models. Because, for obvious reasons, the story and the numbers have to go together. And it's not uncommon for companies to start with a story, run through the numbers, adjust the story, adjust the numbers, and do this iteratively to a place where they say, okay, now we understand more clearly about what the future could be, what our response is, and we're positioned to move forward with both greater clarity and greater confidence. The way we've encourage companies to structure the scenarios is to identify a best case, a worst case, a likely case. And Merv, as you and the ATI group were going through this, one of the scenarios you focused on was really more the worst case scenario. But talk about this, if you would, please.
For sure. Just as a lead into that, the survey that we talked about before at the beginning of the seminar, that National Center for Middle Management, one of the questions they asked the CEOs was, what are the 2 things that keep you up at night as we go through this process? And the majority of them were worried, obviously, about the cash flow situation of the company going forward, but also they were concerned about the supply chain and the resilience of that. And those are going to come through in the ATI story as well. As Lars described, there are basically 3 cases here that ATI management needs to be concerned about. But more importantly, irrespective of those three cases, there is a decision that the management can't avoid. And that clearly is the oil and gas situation. Irrespective of how the automotive business is going to favor, oil and gas is in deep trouble. And so management has to make a decision, irrespective of the three cases, about actually exiting the oil and gas business and closing down plant one. But as you start to look at the three cases here, clearly the best case is probably not going to happen maybe for the next 24 or 36 months. So the real focus is look at the likely case and the worst case. And in the likely case, they're going to be able to, as the numbers will show later on, to retain their engineering team for the benefit of the OEMs. But because of the high cost in maintaining this fixed cost situation, there's going to be an erosion on the margin of the bottom line. But the likely case with the volume coming in from OEMs says that the company can still make money, and it's kind of in a holding pattern, if you will, waiting for things to evolve further down the road. But unfortunately, what's going to happen and the way the market is starting to react slowly, managers are going to have to focus on the worst case. And as much as they'd love to stay in the OEM business as a tier one supplier, when they start going through the analysis of the company and what the conditions are there, it's clearer and clearer that they're not going to be able to retain that situation. That the only way they can retain ATI as a company is to start focusing on being an engineering and support consulting group rather than being a manufacturing company. So those are the kind of things that ATI is going to have to come to grips with. And what drove them to this situation was not the assumption so much as it was the financial model that told them that from a cash standpoint, they weren't going to survive. So as part of the Pivot 2020 Toolkit, as Locke mentioned before, there's a very effective financial analysis model attached. And Locke's going to take us through that now.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Merv. I love how you sort of set this up, that the best case is, we'd love for it to happen, but it may take a while. The likely case, is a holding pattern. Worst case, we're going to have to change our business. And I suspect a lot of companies are in a similar kind of space as they're looking at the best case, likely case, worst case. And then, as you also said, it became clear about how to manage around that worst case as you ran through the financials. So we strongly recommend that the companies that go through this process do in fact run through the financials. And what we have in the Pivot 2020 Toolkit is a financial model which you can use if you wish. It requires a knowledge of Excel and a knowledge of financial variables and having access to financial information, but it doesn't have to be at CFO level necessarily. But it's designed to really help you understand and compare the revenue, profitability, and cash flow impacts of each of the three scenarios. The three scenarios all have their own place within the model, and the three scenarios in every case is also compared to a baseline. And the baseline in the model, you might say, hey, let's use 2019 as our baseline, or let's use our projected 2020 before COVID hit as our baseline. In either case, what we want to identify is a baseline that of finances that your team understands, is comfortable with. And then when we work through the three scenarios, we compare to baseline to better understand what are the not only the actions that are different than the baseline, but the financial implications of those actions. And I'll just run you through some of the key inputs of the financial model. There's a set of inputs that are focused on P&L, particularly revenue, and then working through the P&L statement. And as you may see here, there's a baseline, in this case, a best case, worst case, likely case, that you would then use this model to get greater clarity about, all the way down, starting with revenues down to EBITDA and income before taxes, and finally net earning. And not only do you have these as these financial data points as key inputs, but then also the impacts of different actions that you would take, and the impact and the financial adjustments that you would expect on either the revenue side or the cost side, depending upon what the actions are. And I won't go into detail here, except to point out that under different scenarios, best case, worst case, likely case, there are different actions, and there are different financial implications of those actions, not only across different parts of the business, but also down at the bottom, you may see debt service and CapEx. We really try and cover the full range of the P&L statement. And then once you get through the P&L inputs, then we work on the cash flow side. And cash flow is obviously really critical, because one of the key questions that management's going to have to work with, particularly in the worst case scenario, is, are we going to run out of cash? When might that happen? How much more do we need? The financial model is not in itself a model that you would use to actually make financial decisions per se, because it's not that precise, but it is intended to be directionally meaningful enough and give you a sense of magnitude, so that as you run through this analysis with the different scenarios, you will have confidence in being able to say, wow, this is how close we're getting to the line here. Wow, we're going to need more cash, and if so, this is probably the time frame we're going to need it and the amount. Or alternatively, if we proceed this way, we're going to hit a financial cliff, and maybe we need to go back and re-examine, look through again our scenarios, think through again our scenarios. This is an interactive process, and so one of the beauties of this model is that you can make changes on the inputs, and the outputs will show up immediately, and they come together in a summary of financials across baseline, best case, worst case, likely case. And it really gives a good snapshot of what the potential P&L implications are over a 12-month period. And then down at the bottom, you'll see, also what the cash flow implications of this could be. And, Mike, as you went through this with your business, tell us, why it was so important for you.
Yeah, I know it seems like a lot of work, and it is, but it creates great value. So with our team, probably not unlike a lot, we were focused at first on the worst case. And our concern was, with all the work we had put in on our action plans, what if we fall short? What if that only gets us to the 20-yard line and we have to go back and make further changes? And we were concerned, one, that would most likely be very reactionary on our part, and two, it would erode the confidence of our entire organization in terms of the fact that we had a real grip on what was happening. So we really wanted to look into the financial numbers to validate that the actions that we had put in place were going to get us all the way home. The second piece that became apparent right away, and not surprisingly, is our bank wanted that same level of confidence. And so when we began to talk to them and say, okay, our team is working on different scenarios and action plans to be able to weather it, and we've got a set of numbers so that you, along with us, can see exactly what the cash impact is going to be on our business. Obviously, that allowed them to be a much more effective partner with us moving through the crisis as well. Now, ironically, at the end, it wasn't the worst case scenario that benefited us the most, because while 9/11 had a real disruption on the travel industry for a number of months, consumer staples bounced back very quickly. But we had planned for that too. And so we didn't make a lot of knee-jerk reactions up front, didn't disrupt the organization unnecessarily. We were able to then weather the crisis and position ourselves that much more strongly coming out of it. So regardless of which scenario comes at you, understanding the financial ramifications of each, I think is very important to the team. And so Merv, to add a little bit more to that, why don't you walk them through exactly what you learned with ATI?
Sure. As you mentioned before, obviously the best case is really something that's not in the near future, so let's not talk about that. But the thing that was going to drive both the scenarios, the most likely case and the worst case, was this need to retain the engineering services that the OEMs were acquiring. And that had a significant effect upon the cost structure. And as we look at the numbers and go through what's going to happen, you can see net earnings that the worst case situation is not a sustainable business. And so management's going to find some way of monitoring where the market is going over the next 30 to 90 days to help it understand whether it needs to go to a worst case situation, which means it's going to have to severely pivot the organization, whether it can go into a holding pattern. And so what it needed to do was to try to quickly identify some key industry indicators that would help it understand where it was going so it could make some decisions in the near future. And so, Locke, let's talk about the industry indicators.
Yeah, what's happening in the near future? Actually, I mean, I'm going to turn it over to Mike because Mike, you were the champion of this right at the get-go, and help us understand how and why.
This was the most interesting piece for us, mainly because we didn't really see that we needed it at first. It just became really apparent to us very quickly that we did. So even after all the work that we had put into planning, the team was still sitting around debating, hey, it's going to be the best case. It's going to be the worst case. And very quickly we had to tell ourselves, look, guys, we still don't know that. So let's just get agreement on what indicators are we going to look towards? What indicators can we agree upon are going to tell us which way this thing is breaking? And so when you look at indicators, they really fall in one of three buckets. They could be macro, as Locke had indicated. So it could be GDP, it could be unemployment, it could be consumer sentiment, very broad indicators of the health of the economy. It could be industry, things like foot traffic for retail, mortgage applications, perhaps for home building. All industries have indicators, measurements on the health of that industry, and certainly it could be company. We all have things that we look at that tell us the relative health of our organization, and those are going to remain important, but you may find they're not going to be sufficient. We didn't. So we looked at this and said, certainly we trust a lot of the measurements that we have used in the past, but a terrorist attack like this is going to change the consumer, and we're going to have to bring in other indicators that are going to help us see exactly what that change is. So we actually expanded and began to take a look at different indications of which way things were trending. And once you have those, then you have to turn to the decisions that need to be made. And this was a really interesting one for us. Certainly everybody would relate to, okay, you've got action plans, and if suddenly it materializes that revenue is going to go down by 30%, you got actions you got to take, and you need to understand that now. And certainly that's a big part of this, and those decisions will have to be made. But what's interesting is there will be changes in the business environment. All crises produce change. Magnitude of it, permanency of it may be different, but change is going to come, and you're going to start to see those, and you're going to start to react to those. And so there is almost this natural tension that exists between the from our situation. Now, again, we were very fortunate. We didn't have to go through a lot of the highly disruptive actions in a worst case scenario. And although consumer staples rebounded quickly, that doesn't mean that the consumer didn't change. And in fact, what we began to see, the consumer, I'm not going to say fearful, that's too strong a word, but became concerned about large gatherings like malls for being potential terrorist targets. And they began to explore what other avenues, what other platforms might I use to begin to shop. And we were just in the early phases of determining what our digital platform was going to be as a company, and trying to explore e-commerce that was really in its infancy. And that helped us. I'm not going to say that was the only data point we looked at, but it was a data point that validated that the consumer might begin to shift, and added more encouragement to us to begin to invest in different areas that consumers may turn to shop. Now, did that help our business in 2001 or 2002? No, it didn't. But I would say because we stayed on that track, 4 years later, 5 years later, we were much farther ahead. than most of our competition in terms of evolving in that direction. So some of the things that come out of here on the decision piece will definitely be about the ability of the business to survive the crisis, but you're also going to find that things are going to emerge that are going to tell you about how you can position yourself that much more strongly when the crisis is done. So this is a very important segment in terms of being able to take full advantage of all that this particular tool has to offer. And Merv, any more insights that you could share on that relative to advanced tubing?
Sure. I think the first obvious one is the oil and gas business. Just for a reference point, the US and Canadian oil and gas business has to have oil at $45 a barrel to break even. And the current spot buy in August for Brent crude is now $25. So the industry in North America basically is at a standstill. So getting out of the business is a good decision for the ATI management to make. So, but from an automotive standpoint, to your point, Mike, there are a number of kind of indicators. One is a more global one. What is the US automotive production going to be? It's not going to be a 16 million year. It's going to be much less than that. What's it going to be? And more importantly, frankly, on a more local level, what are the dealer inventories? Many cars sitting on the dealers' lots these days. Typically, you like to see 60 days or less. Right now, it's probably getting towards 90. Customers are worrying about their jobs. Do they have money to pay the rent, to pay food? Can they buy a new car? Do they want to go to the dealerships? That's going to affect on a global basis how the industry responds. On a more granular level, as an automotive supplier, you worry about what platforms you're providing parts to. If you're selling into the Ford Fusion or the Chevy Malibu, you've got a problem. Honda Accord, maybe you're okay. But if you're supplying into the F-150, maybe life will be a little easier for you as you go down the road. So that's important on a global basis. Obviously, from a local basis, you're looking directly at the projected sales. Used to be 800,000 a month. Now it's down to 30,000 a month as the OEMs start to launch up. What are those going to be? So those are the kind of things that you're going to be watching on a very close basis. Short term, the management's got to make some decisions. They got to shut down plant one. They got to start monitoring daily their inventory situation, because irrespective of whether they're going to be into the worst case or not, they've got to maintain their just-in-time supply situation to the industry. So bottom line, I hope ATI makes it. They've got all the right tools in place to keep them involved. So from a shareholder standpoint, we honestly believe that understanding how to negotiate these difficult times with scenario planning has a real value for many companies. Locke?
Yeah. Well, and Merv, I really liked how you drew the connection between, the leading indicators really pointing to the worst scenario.
Right.
And in the worst scenario, the strategy is we're gonna close plant one. So the near term thing is we need to start laying the groundwork. We're not in the next 30 days, we're not closing it, but maybe in the next 60 to 90, and we need to start laying the groundwork for that right now. And that really gives a sense of the real power of this tool. But everything that we've shared about so far is theoretical, unless it proves itself in practice. And so with this, I'd love to turn the microphone over to you, Josh. I would love for you to introduce Jira Metal a little bit more fully, and then talk about why you did this, what's worked, what didn't work. You just heard the presentation. Tell us true. How is this aligned with your experiences? What is it important? What kind of guidance would you provide to other members of the webinar here going forward, should they choose to look at scenario planning and the Pivot 2020 toolkit?
Yeah, thanks, Locke. So for Jira Metal, I am responsible for the strategic direction of our manufacturing, as well as overseeing kind of the internal departments that we have. So, I help out in a lot of other aspects, but as we really started to get into kind of March timeframe, the coronavirus pandemic was really taking hold. There was a lot of information out there. And so in the plant management group I'm on with the MMTC here in West Michigan, the Pivot 2020 was being talked about as a beta test. And so that intrigued me, knowing kind of what we were looking at with our customers and the supply chain issues. So it really, as we look to plan and really take hold of our business, it was a great tool, and we reached out and started to walk through that. So brief background on Gyra. We are a metal stamping manufacturer located here in Granville, it's West Michigan. We service the office furniture, industrial hardware, outdoor power equipment, and automotive industries. Luckily, we are diversified, but we have seen a lot of change within those industries. Really, the only one that's held strong through all this was the industrial hardware. We are a perennial Supplier Excellence Award winner and an innovator that provides customers with unique solutions. We pride ourselves against the competition that anybody can go out and buy the equipment we have. It's really how do we use that and service our customers that makes Gyra different. We are a people and service driven company, systems driven. We have new assembly capabilities that we're constantly trying to grow, and new technologies with the introduction of our servo press a couple years back. We are ISO 9001 2015 certified and have been minority owned since 2015. We really are focusing on continued growth with our customers. Sales is a long process, and growing with our existing customers is first our focus here, but we are strategically expanding into new markets, which is a lot of what the Pivot 2020 has helped us kind of look towards. You realize that you have sales declines in certain markets, and you kind of wish you would have gone after a few other industries, 6 months, 12 months back. But everybody has 2020 when you look back. So what we're trying to do is strive to be an agile and nimble business. And the Pivot 2020 for us really challenged a few of the things that we were comfortable with. It forced us to ask some difficult questions. The group that you mentioned, Locke, to kind of have, we did have our CEO, our director of marketing and sales, director of quality, HR, myself over operations, and we had our customer experience manager. So really, when we walked through this, we had all of our angles covered, both from our customers, suppliers, and our team members. And it really allowed us to dig deep and scrub every possibility. And, we spent probably too much time on phase one the first day to where we started burning out. And, that'd be an area of advice for anyone that's kind of looking forward is take your time with this. We had a sense of urgency when we started doing this during the beta test, and everything was changing every day. So we really wanted to be aggressive and go after it. But I think what we did was, tried to accomplish too much too fast. And so when we came back on the second day, we really stirred up a lot better conversation, and that seemed to bode well as we went into phase two.
And as you went into the phase two, Josh, the scenario planning and then the financial piece of that, share about your experience there.
So the scenario planning really was helpful as we really looked at the best case, worst case, and the likely case. It was kind of scary as you start talking about worst case. I mean, there's a lot of things that we haven't really had to think about. But even with the ATI example, we have 2 locations here in West Michigan. We're blessed to be in a position where we've already been restructuring for the last 18 months. So kind of wrapping up that process to move all the manufacturing into one location is a big push to try and complete that by the end of June. But along with it, we're starting to discuss what does that worst case mean for both facilities? Are we, going to try and cram everything into one and reduce our footprint and our costs? Or how does that set us up for a best case where we may have customers that are overloaded, suppliers that they have that are going out, some of our competitors may go out. And so it's really stretched our thinking on both ends and allowed us to kind of come up with a really good likely case that I think we have plans in place.
Yeah. And talk about the financial side, because you went through some learning there as well.
Yeah, we were in a transition with our controller role, and one of the challenges we had is, again, with everything taking hold in Michigan with the stay-at-home order, we had a lot of our team members working remote. So some of the challenges we faced going through the financial planning was, trying to get the toolkit that you guys provided and the template in front of our controller, who had already been developing some financial plans. He was pretty privy to what he had. It had more details specifically to our business, but it did not have that best, worst, and likely case. And so after a couple of conversations on, the calls with you guys, really the advice was whether you use our tool or not, you have to focus on different scenarios. And I think, Locke, your words were, you don't want to run into a wall prior than you had planned for it, And so what we ended up doing was looking at the financial model that we had, starting to map out what we felt was realistic percentages of sales as a likely case. And then knowing the industries that we're in and some of those indicators that we're following, you're hearing a lot of things that might lead us towards more of that worst case scenario. And for us, that wall was certainly a little closer than we had initially thought. And so it really drove our decision making around, I would say, that worst case plan to be maybe a little more urgent in matter. And as we kind of looked at that and knowing where our threshold was with a reduction of sales that would drive certain activities, it is what I would call maybe nerve-wracking to discuss. But once you're done with it, it gives you a sense of comfort that if that should happen, you have a very stable plan and process.
Yeah, that was powerful when you shared it with us, earlier on, that the interactivity, the iteration between plan numbers, was revealing to you. And as you're looking at the data that you're now monitoring going forward, just talk for a moment how you're integrating the monitor and watch phase into your process.
Yeah, so what we're doing right now is we've implemented a weekly meeting on Tuesdays where we're doing a quick review of our production numbers. We're looking at financials. And as we roll through some of these things, it's really helping us to look at what those likely cases were. And we've got our marketing guy looking at the customer aspect. We've got our customer experience guy looking at that as well. So we're really tuned in with our customers. We're also watching the markets. With industrial hardware, we're looking at the buildings that are going up and, are those projects resuming? Is there going to be vacancy in the future? So we're not only working on right now and what we do coming out of this in April, May, June, but we're also looking at what is the market going to do in 6 months or next year? Like I said earlier, we're in office furniture, we're in industrial hardware. So, if buildings are changing or, there's renovation that might happen, the product lines that we serve in both of those markets may change. They may increase in sales, they may decrease. And so that's really forced us from an indicator to kind of look at what are those businesses that are going to thrive out of this and how can we tap into those markets.
And it sounds, Josh, like this process has also made you all and your team much more sensitized to what is happening in with your customers and your customers' customers. Has forced you to look into the future and become aware of that to a degree perhaps more so than where you guys were 4 months ago.
Yeah, I mean, we're really a tier one for probably 90% of our sales, and we always anticipated the OEM as our customer, and that's where we would look. And we would dabble a little bit in the markets, but it has forced us to not only look at our customers, as you mentioned, but really just business globally and the shifts and the changes in cultures and everything that are coming out of this. Certainly there's a lot of new habits that are taking place, and people now, it's going on 2 to 3 months in some parts of the world. So life, as everybody knows, it is changing, and we're getting used to a new norm. It's really, nobody has a crystal ball, but you have to spend time focusing on these areas and those indicators if you're going to have any chance of kind of come out of this, successfully.
Yeah. Well, Josh, thank you so much for joining us on the panel, sharing your experiences. Technically, that actually wraps up the formal part of the program. There's a couple of next steps that I'll talk about in just a minute or two, but now we'd love to open to questions. And Ed, would you just lead us off here and
Yep.
if there are
Yep.
questions to ask?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Locke. And Josh, this is directed specifically to you, at least initially, and then maybe Locke could weigh on it as well. There was a question from Dave regarding how long this should take, over what period of time, ideally, now that you're looking at it in retrospect, and are there shortcuts that can be taken without compromising the process, at least for the first go around?
I think that would depend on how robust, the businesses ran. If you have monthly or quarterly meetings and you're looking at some of the markets and things already, I think you probably would have a pretty good handle on your business, and you would need to focus on maybe some of that worst case. But for us, we've been transitioning as a company, and we've been focusing on a lot of new sales and markets already, but a lot of that was just talk. There wasn't a whole lot of action in place. And so I think as we went through this, I tried to tackle a lot the first week, but ideally I think phase one, if you break that down into 2, possibly 3 days, depending on the content you're getting, would be a lot better, because the quality of our discussion really deteriorated at 2 to 3 hours into that. And so if you're going to use this information to plan over the next 3, 6, 12 months, you really want to have good quality, discussion. So phase one, I would say break it down into 2 or 3 days, depending on your company. Really try to, have good dialogue back and forth. Phase two, it went pretty quick for us, because I think a lot of the stuff that we covered in phase one set us up nicely for those scenarios. And really, we spent about 3 weeks. Again, I had quite a few people that were working remote or coming in only on certain days of the week. So we spread it out over 3 weeks to really, scrub it and prepare things. And what helped us is to provide the clarity, and then the path for execution, and then the monitoring. And I think that's where, a lot of companies fall short, is the execution and then monitoring that plan.
Great. And Locke, do you have a perspective on that, on things that might be done to make it more expeditious without giving up anything meaningful?
Yeah, I just add to Josh's comments. The assessment in particular has distinct components to it, and before you all get together as a group, you might have your specialists within the company address those questions, and then bring them to the larger group. So there is some parts that can be divide and conquer at the beginning, but I think part of the key value of this whole process is it is fundamentally a group exercise, and it's crucial to get to group clarity about where the company is, what the futures could be, what the scenarios responses could be. And Josh, it sounds like you have a pretty effective group process, but would you how crucial is it that the whole group be aligned with the stories that are coming through this through this exercise?
Well, I think it's extremely critical, because every decision that we make at the top level, if we're not aligned, will impact the trajectory or the pace at which the company moves forward. And an example would be, I don't know if anybody's ever seen draft horses, but a team of horses that are not pulling together will not move anything. And you really have to be working together and at an even pace. And I think, as you said, it is a group exercise, but one of the things that helped is we kind of had the beta version is I sent it all out to our group in advance. So they were able to at least see the content, and they were able to come with, a little bit of thought on it. And I think that helped expedite some of our discussion. But again, the work really happened in the room as a group.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ed, and I don't have anything more to add at this moment.
That's great. Thanks, Locke. And Josh, I have a follow-up question too. I was intrigued by the conversation we had in preparation for this, where you talked about taking a bigger look at what's happening in the marketplace. Actually, office environments are changing, and as opposed to you responding to what your buyers are doing, or your customers, you're looking ahead and thinking about what that's going to look like and where there might be market opportunities for you as an organization. Could you talk a little bit more about that and how that got you thinking about that, and considering different product services that you might lean into in this new environment?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that we've, our owners involved in a lot of different markets and networking groups. And so we've had discussions with, competitors, we've had discussions with customers, we've had discussions with, contractors in the area and a lot of other people. So, we all have access to the CDC information around the guidelines and social distancing and, surfaces and sanitation and all these areas. But what we're hearing is, the office environments, there was a big push for open office and collaborative space for a number of years. And, we have products that are serviced in those markets, but we also have a lot of the legacy products that are more set up for cubicle systems and, less dense areas. And what we're seeing now is a big push for space. And, construction projects. They're talking about widening hallways. They're talking about, differences in schools and classroom sizes. And really what we're trying to do is understand, if a lot of these changes take effect, which many people are hesitant, they're fearful of going back into really crammed, dense spaces. And so what we're trying to do is understand both from, the building market and how construction might change, along with our customers and what, just general feedback from consumers are bringing, is trying to paint a little bit of a futuristic picture on what products do we need to get into. There's a lot of people that are saying, 30% of, certain companies might be working from home. So they might need a nice chair. They might need a height adjustable desk. There's articles on sitting too long and the neck and back problems that are coming from those that are working remote from home. So, ergonomics will play an issue into the future as well. So we're trying to look at all that information and, be where our customer needs us in the future so that we can support the changing market.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
I want to acknowledge we have 10 minutes left for our time here, and Josh, just want to thank you so much for joining us here this morning. Sharing your insights, perspectives, and experiences in this webinar. I want to also just thank again Automation Alley for hosting the webinar and really giving us an opportunity to share this with Automation Alley members. For those of you who have listened with this to the webinar and are intrigued, there are some specific next steps that we'd encourage you to take. First of all, I will be sending out the Pivot 2020 ebook, so you'll have a chance to look at that. What you'll see and what you've picked up from the webinar is that, this is going to take some work, take some focus. So make the decision to go ahead and proceed and commit the time necessary to get the process going. Second step would be forming and engaging the pivot team in your company, setting specific dates and times to get things done, and then taking advantage of some pro bono coaching that Shepherd Advisors is offering to companies that want to go through this. We've made it largely, do it yourself, but there are going to be ways in which I'm sure we can, support you in both getting started and executing more effectively. Josh, let me just punt back to you for a moment. You've had you went through these steps. Any perspectives you want to share with other members, folks on the webinar?
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that's going to take some time. I mean, the meeting times, the 1 to 2 business days. I think if you really want to do this well, whoever's leading this project needs to have some time carved for just the follow-ups, making sure that any action items that come out of this are followed up on and set out. One of the things that we really didn't talk a whole lot about, but that Ed and I have had some discussions on, is really the culture aspect. And, who is your business going into this and who do you want to be coming out of it? And so that's created a lot of discussion for Gyra around, who do we want to be and what kind of a culture do we want to set up for this? They sometimes say never let a crisis go to waste. And I think as we really evaluate who we are as a company, we're set up well for the future, but there's always room to grow and evolve and change for the better. And that's one of the things that we're going to focus on as well. So, starting out with just the Pivot 2020, it's evolved from more of a business plan to a company plan.
Nice.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you, Josh. And just to build on that, really, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, Shepherd, we're prepared and available to provide pro bono support for companies that are going to get started in this. We can help get you oriented, familiarized with the toolkit, and then as you go through this, we'll set some time to coach you all, particularly as you get through the second and third tool and moving towards monitoring and acting. Want to support you in moving from planning to execution, going forward. And then there are additional enhanced solutions that we can support you with on a fee basis, particularly when it comes to facilitating team meetings and this process, additional market research, and then Josh, as you were referencing, other kinds of support whether it be on culture side, strategy side, execution side, that will help you move from planning, execution, from hoping it works to making it successful. With that, Ed, are there any final questions? We've got just a few more minutes here before I hand it back to Allison.
No, it looks like that's it for right now, Locke. Thank you.
Okay, and with that, if you all have any questions for me or for the Shepherd team, please send them our way. If you have any questions for Josh, let us know, and we'll pass them on to Josh. We thank you very, very much for taking making your time available and spending this morning with us to learn about scenario planning and the Pivot 2020 toolkit and its various components. As you are working on this going forward, and I love this quote from Eisenhower, in preparing for battle, found always that, plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. And that is, fundamentally what we've been talking about this morning. We hope you too find it to be not only useful, but indispensable. Thank you very, very much. And with that, Allison, I'll hand the microphone back to you.
Perfect. I just want to say thank you again, everybody, for this panel. And like he mentioned, we are gonna have a link to the guidebook on the event posting. So the link you registered for this webinar on will have a little more information for you, as well as contact information if you have further questions or anything along those lines. Be sure, Automation Alley-wise, to tune into some of our other live stream events we have coming up. And any questions you have answers can be found on our website, as well as my email, phone number, if you have any further questions. So thank you so much. And this will also be recorded and live on our website if you want to watch it again. So thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you all.